Okay, so we just mentioned that this example essentially uses iterator that replaces the range loop like this that goes through the through all of the elements. However, what I can also do is that I can say element temporary element equals new element, right? And so instead of inserting new element every time, I can just insert temp someplace over here. And so what Iterator allows us to do is that it's very friendly when you can, you can say that once you obtain the element inside your collection, you can say, for instance, if you can just say if this element that we're trying to analyze equals temp, right? When we use equal with object references, only the addresses of objects are compared. Basically, we can say something like we can print that we're actually removing this specific element, and we can use the iterator to remove, right? To remove the object, the object from the collection. So this is where the iterator becomes very helpful, because it allows stable, stable loop while removing or inserting, right? While changing the content in our collection, right? So it really allows the stable modification such as remove. And so if I don't want to print it again here, I can just say continue, right? But this really, this removal of element really is not a very good idea for the range loop like this for each element, because it just presumes a read-only access to the content of the collection. So let's just test this code and see if the temporary element will indeed be removed from our collection. So we can just run this over here. So it says yes, we're removing this element. Other elements continue to exist, and the iterator is still stable. And it still can reliably tell us whether the next object exists and whether, and so if it does, then we just proceed to the next one, right? So we can, so we have this sort of flexibility with iterators. And in our design pattern outline here, we, under the section that talks about behavioral patterns, right, which identify typical communication patterns, clarify assignment of responsibilities, and formalize complex control flow. I guess we're trying to address this problem with our iterator. Right here, we do have the iterator outline over here. So the iterator, which is usually the design pattern, like I said, simply relies on the idea that you have a helper object over here, the iterator helper object, which remembers the reference to the collection and allows you to navigate through individual objects while allowing some complex operations. Right, so we say if we have a container of elements or any sort of aggregation, we could examine the elements you know, sort of like uniformly. If we want the client application to have no knowledge about the container type, container size, and the keys of associative containers such as map or hash map, then we can use an iterator, right? So basically this is the diagram that we have our collection over here, which allows us to create the iterator. In our Java example, of course, this was simply an iterator, a method that ArrayList has to provide us the iterator, and this can be parameterized by the type of element that the collection contains. Right? So iterator also is basically an interface which can be implemented by the concrete iterator, and concrete iterator class essentially holds on the reference to the actual collection over here. Right? So this is the arrangement, and these are the formal names or parts of this design pattern. Basically, you have the iterator, which defines an interface for element traversal and access. Again, in our example, has next, next, and remove are the methods that demonstrate basically the interface for the element traversal and access. Concrete elevator is we don't even know which object implements it because we're using an iterator interface. So internally, the actual implementation of our iterator obviously keeps track of the position and also keeps track of the you know, of the actual collection, right? So it has reference to the collection object, right? And so we say that the collection defines an interface for creating an iterator object. Again, it's this part right here, right? And so concrete aggregate implements the iterator creation and returns instance of the proper concrete iterator. So it's very typical that collection itself has the method that returns you, gives you an instance of an appropriate iterator type. And that's just the demonstration we have today with this sort of access. All right, so again, we have the sample over here, which is written in C++. There also may be special types of iterators which are null iterators. In our case, we did not use a null iterator, which typically marks the end or beginning of the collection. In our case, we had a method which told us whether the iterator still has elements that it can advance to, right? And so this is not something that we were focusing on today, but in summary, the iterator encapsulates the internal structure of how the iteration occurs, right? So we don't know what happens when we say next, but it just happens. It just it does the right thing, and even when we remove the elements in the midst of this loop, everything's okay. So iterators are very common. In fact, the entire C++ library, standard library that deals with algorithms and containers uses iterators, exclusively uses the iterators to provide, you know, the connection between the collections and all of the algorithms, right? So this is essentially our Iterator Summary, you know, for today's overview. And since we're talking about the behavioral patterns, another interesting behavioral pattern which also falls into the category of the complex control flow, but also sort of touches on others, like, you know, the responsibilities, who is responsible for what, and also some form of communication pattern, is something that I also would like to talk about today, is the visitor design pattern. So let's talk about the visitor design pattern.